My name is Shenzo the Lost. I am your host, as always. Joining me today, we have Shoshima.
Hello.
And returning from a 2-episode hiatus, we've got the disembodied voice of SamuraiNoodlez.
How's it going?
So, so today, we spent kind of took 2 weeks off of the, and by 2 weeks, I mean we're kind of skipping. If you haven't noticed the theme here, we're taking like every 2 weeks we're talking Marvel. So today is another Marvel episode. Everybody, yay, Marvel!
Yay! I hope you like it because that's what we're doing.
Yeah, and if you don't,
Oops.
I'm not sorry.
Oh.
I'm not sorry at all. The MCU is one of my favorite things on the planet, so I'm not sorry. I'm sorry that I'm not sorry, but I'm not sorry.
This is our show, though.
Yeah,
mostly yours.
Yeah, I mean mostly, but I mean you guys are helping me out with it by being here. Mostly, I'm doing all the editing and the recording and the scheduling, but that's fine.
I show up.
Yeah, hey, that's cool. Sometimes you bring
Shenzo is a busy man.
Ah, God, yeah, that's an understatement of the year, but I appreciate you acknowledging that. Thank you, Samurai. So it's really good to have you back. Last week, we talked about video games, and we did talk at the end how we would try to get Samurai's opinion on some video games. So we'll definitely revisit that topic. Maybe not as generally as we did, but we will absolutely be revisiting video games a lot here on this podcast. But today, we're going to talk about the MCU once again, and kind of the influences behind it, maybe some of the stories. And we're going to continue with the third movie in Phase 1, Iron Man 2. So Iron Man 2 is, I think, universally agreed to be kind of a step backwards from Iron Man 1. It was still good, don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But I think most people would probably rank Iron Man 2 on either the middle or the lower end of the MCU films, if they had a tier list. I know I certainly do. It's near the bottom for me. It's not at the bottom, but it's definitely in the lower half. How about you, Shoshima? You think the same thing?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because it's at the time it totally seemed like okay, yeah, the second movie's not always as strong, but then like now looking back at it, like you have all these other great movies that only got better.
Yeah.
But then Iron Man, I think, is just more of a product of its time.
Yeah, I think so. How about you, Samurai? Where would you just, you don't have to have specific, but like generally speaking, where would you rank Iron Man 2, like kind of in your MCU tier list?
So here's the thing. Definitely not at the bottom. But without really going into it, which one was the big bad in that one?
See, so that's the big issue. It was Mickey Rourke, and he was playing a combination character. He was basically a combination of two Iron Man villains. I think it's Whiplash and Crimson Dynamo. So he was basically like a hybrid villain.
Yeah, I remember he was supposed to be Whiplash, but I don't remember Crimson Dynamo that much.
Yeah, so Crimson Dynamo, for those who are not familiar, is quite literally like the embodiment of comics in the 60s and 70s during the Red Scare. He is a Russian man with an armor suit, but the recurring joke is that his tech is always inferior
compared to
Iron Man. It's like it's the whole American exceptionalism like versus the Soviet trying to catch up. It's us versus the godless communist type thing. So that's why Mickey Rourke's character Whiplash is Russian. It's because that's where he gets the whole Russian background is the integrated that part of Crimson Dynamo, and then of course at the end when he has the his own super suit, taking on both War Machine and Iron Man at the same time. That is also influenced from Crimson Dynamo, and of course the whips he uses are Whiplash.
Yeah, Whiplash.
So, anyway, Samurai, please continue.
So, that was so early, and I think I only watched it once, and all I can remember is actually the trailer.
Yeah, so that's fair, but I think that kind of gets to the point that Iron Man 2 is kind of one of the more forgettable MCU films.
Not gonna lie, that trailer was dope, though.
It was, and that's one thing Marvel's always been good at is their trailers, for better or for worse. But yeah, it is something that for Iron Man 2, like it was definitely a step backwards. It was still really good. Like I use the argument like the worst Pixar film is still a really good film.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that way about Iron Man 2. Like, it's still a good movie,
Yeah.
but it's not, I think, as widely remembered.
It doesn't have the same, like, magic, for lack of better words.
Yeah. So notably, in Phase 1, it's the only direct sequel.
Mm-hmm.
Thor 2 and Captain America 2, and we never got a Hulk 2, as we talked about in the Hulk podcast, all came into Phase 2. But Iron Man, with Robert Downey Jr., got his Iron Man 2 in 2010. It actually came out before either Thor or Captain America's first movie.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most important things about Iron Man 2 is that it really starts to establish the role of Sam Jackson's Nick Fury. It introduces Natasha Romanoff,
Mm-hmm.
Black Widow, Scarlett Johansson, and it really starts to kind of like further build on this expanded universe that beforehand was pretty much only limited to after credit scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Namely with Nick Fury appearing at the end credits of Iron Man, and then Tony Stark appearing at the end of Hulk.
Mm-hmm.
So, but other than that, there wasn't really a whole lot of like crossover. But here you actually have like Nick Fury getting involved. Like Sam Jackson plays a significant role in this movie.
Yeah.
Again, Natasha Romanoff, who is like literally introduced undercover as I think she goes by the name Natalie, who's a secretary that works under Pepper. But for those that don't remember, like Samurai, the plot is pretty simple. The magnet that is keeping the shrapnel out of Tony Stark's heart from the damage he suffered in the first movie is poisoning him, which was a story from the comics. It's a pretty typical story, actually. And Tony Stark believes he's dying. And he starts acting increasingly erratic to the point where his best friend, Rhodey, James Rhodes, now played by Don Cheadle, who replaced Terrence Howard, after, I believe, some kind of contract dispute. I don't remember the details exactly of what led to Terrence Howard's departure. But
and not Cuba Gooding Jr.
Yeah, not Cuba Gooding Jr. We made that mistake during the Iron Man.
I was thinking
podcast.
it, but I didn't say anything.
Yeah, thanks for that callback, Samurai. But of course, if anyone was going to do it, it probably should have been you, as the one who called it out during the first podcast. So I'll let it slide this time.
This time. Don't you do it again next time.
No. I feel that's going to be a recurring gag.
Oh,
like throughout this podcast is that we can't tell Terrence Howard and Cuba Gooding Jr. apart. Yeah, basically he ends up taking his own suit and then going over to Justin Hammer, who is another one of Tony Stark's rivals who's trying to keep up and failing miserably, including a really nasty video of their super suit testing where literally a soldier splits his spine.
Mm-hmm.
That's always fun.
That part I do remember.
Yeah, that pilot survived, by the way. That was one of Justin Hammer's lines. And yeah, basically, like it comes to a head where Nick Fury, he's Stark is acting so erratically and getting like so drunk and acting irresponsibly that Nick Fury basically has to come and slap him upside the head and say, "Hey, like I knew Howard Stark. You need to fix this." And lo and behold, Howard is like 50 to 100 years ahead of everybody else, and has discovered a new element that he was unable to make due to the limitations of the technology of his time. Which, after seeing Captain America, the Captain America makes me really wonder like just how far in advanced the technology in the MCU is compared to like the real world.
Aww.
But yeah.
Hey, when you have super metal that just eliminates vibration, you can make a lot of shit.
Yeah, and then we haven't even talked about adamantium yet.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's vibranium. Unobtainium is the other one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, unobtainium is like like I know this isn't Marvel, but like in DC, how kryptonite is an extremely rare rock that literally every Superman villain seems to have unlimited access to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
Joker had a full-on Jade Dragon.
he did. Your sound is really cut out right there. By the way, Samurai, can you repeat that for everybody?
Yeah, no, I was saying that Joker had a full-on Jade Dragon. If you follow the Bruce Timmverse.
Yeah, he did. And that's not counting, like Lex Luthor always wearing kryptonite, which eventually gives him cancer. And, Toy Man who lines his soldiers who makes literal toy soldiers out of kryptonite.
Well, at least with Lex, that kind of tracks because it's a radiated piece of Krypton.
It does. No, it was a great storyline for sure, but like again, it doesn't go for the point that like literally every Superman villain seems to have like a lot of this extremely rare, dangerous.
No, I'm not disagreeing with
element.
that. I just like the radiation still gives him cancer.
Yep, seems legit. But anyway, to go back to the MCU, as you guys probably know, Tony Stark discovers the new element and forges a new arc reactor out of it, and cures himself of the poisoning. And yeah, basically ends up teaming up with Rhodey to save the day against Justin Hammer and Whiplash, Mickey Rourke's character. I found Mickey Rourke to be a pretty interesting casting choice for this movie because at the time I think this was right around like his peak in Hollywood. Like Hollywood was obsessed with him because of his performance in The Wrestler.
Wasn't that around the time of The Wrestler?
Yeah, I think The Wrestler came out in 2009, and he got like critical acclaim for it, or it was 2008. I remember Mickey Rourke even appeared like at a WrestleMania and like punched Jericho in the face.
Yeah, I was about to say, I remember a big thing between him and Jericho.
Yeah, and then I don't really remember a whole lot of movies afterwards that Rourke appeared in, kind of like after Iron Man 2. And to be fair, like I don't feel this was Rourke's fault. I don't think Iron Man 2 was, at least from a villain perspective, like the combination of Whiplash and Crimson Dynamo, I think was necessary. But I don't know. Like I feel they almost tried to do too much because they were trying to juggle like Stark's dealing with his mortality, introducing S.H.I.E.L.D, which I thought was a lot better. Then of course you had Natasha Romanoff was involved, and Justin Hammer, and then you also were making references to like Tony Stark's alcohol problem without actually going like all in on it. So it kind of feels like to me Iron Man 2's issue was it was a sequel and they were still new and they were trying to figure things out. They did some things really well, obviously introducing Black Widow, who would go on to play a very significant role in the MCU moving forward. Scarlett Johansson, of course, doing an amazing job. The cast overall, I think, was fantastic. Don Cheadle, as we know, has become an MCU mainstay.
What?
And he has he was even nominated for an award for literally appearing in like the Falcon and Winter Soldier for like 5 minutes. And when asked about like how did you get nominated, he's like, I have no idea. So we like Don Cheadle a lot here. Don Cheadle's a good dude. Unrelated, but just a sidebar on Don Cheadle. I believe he's also one of the biggest like advocates for like environmentalism and like human rights among celebrities.
Oh, okay.
He's very active in that. Not I think as much as like Mark Ruffalo, but like he's been a big part of that. And I'm a big fan of his. Like just as a human being, he seems like a really chill, down to earth dude who hasn't let all of his success go to his head.
Yeah, he seems pretty cool.
Yep. So with that said, enough of me fawning over Don Cheadle. But let's talk Iron Man and kind of the MCU. So, interestingly enough, this movie almost does more to kind of build and tease the Avengers than any other movie before it, without even dropping their name. Because, longtime fans will know that Natasha Romanoff, aka the Black Widow, is a longtime member of the Avengers. She has a very decorated comic book history. And she is, of course, a former Russian spy who defects to S.H.I.E.L.D. And
I think in this movie, they never call her Black Widow, right?
I don't think so. I think they just introduced her as Natasha Romanoff,
Yeah.
and she was sent to spy on Tony Stark by S.H.I.E.L.D.
So, I mean, yeah, fans can connect the dots, but as far as, the casual member, like, it's not like they say, this is Black Widow.
Yeah, and a little teaser ahead for our discussion on Thor, but like it's the same thing with Hawkeye. Like they introduce Hawkeye the same way. Hawkeye is actually Jeremy Renner's Hawkeye debuts in
first Thor movie.
In the first Thor movie, but I don't think they ever actually call him by his code name.
Martin.
It's just they just call him Barton, and he's a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent with a bow and arrow. So the fans would know, the comic book fans would know, oh, that's Hawkeye. And same with Natasha Romanoff.
Me on the other hand, like, oh, that guy's really good with a bow and arrow. What the fuck is that?
Yeah.
Like he's really good, but he just uses the bow and arrow, doesn't use a gun or nothing. Yeah, no, he's not important.
Yeah.
Like I said, my not DC, my Marvel history is very limited to most of the cinematic universe.
Yeah. Samurai, your audio is like really not good.
Just all over the place still.
Yeah, it was very much like in and out, and it was just not that great of a quality, honestly.
Oh fuck.
It's better now.
I just upped the volume.
Okay. Well, that sounds great now. So I think we're good to go. We'll keep that in because I don't feel like editing that shit out. But
professional podcasters.
Yep. So what he was saying, if you didn't catch it, it was his Marvel history is limited. Samurai's always been more of a DC guy. I think that's fair to say.
Very much so. And even then, most of that is some comic books and Bruce Timmverse.
Yeah. So, but anyway, connecting kind of the dots, we've already talked about how Mickey Rourke's character was a combination of two Iron Man villains, Whiplash and Crimson Dynamo. Justin Hammer, of course, owner of Hammertech. Hammertech is generally another one of Tony Stark's big ongoing antagonists in the comics. It's I think the chief rival to Stark Industries in the comics, and usually always plays second fiddle, but goes far more into military applications and deals shadier shit, just like he kind of does here. And of course, it also allowed Rhodey to don the War Machine armor for the first time.
Yes, it did. Which it was hinted at in Iron Man 1.
It was, yeah. Terrence Howard unfortunately never did get to wear the armor. But yeah, introducing War Machine in, and the bringing back at the Stark Expo, which would actually tie in later to Captain America. And of course, you had Pepper Potts, another mainstay and Tony Stark's main love interest, played by Gwyneth Paltrow. And, Happy Hogan, of course, played by Jon Favreau, who was the director of the first two Iron Man films. And Happy would actually go on to have a technically a longer MCU career than Robert Downey Jr., funnily enough. Because they end up, of course, as we've talked about before, Iron Man does pass away. He sacrifices himself in Endgame, whereas Happy Hogan was still involved in the Spider-Man films. So, fun fact there, where they kind of kept that connection. I don't know what the future with Happy Hogan will be moving forward, now that after No Way Home, which we'll talk about later. But it is definitely a little fun fact that you would think Jon Favreau, who I know plays a much smaller role and didn't necessarily have the lead, so but yeah, he's still in the MCU, and he's still an active character who's still around. Still making decisions.
I think it helps that he's not some main character. He's just kind of in some films, so he doesn't get burnt out per se.
Yeah, and that's always a big thing too. You play the same character for
too long, and it's just you want something different.
Yeah, unless of course you're Nick Fury, Samuel L. Jackson, who made a public statement not that long ago about how he doesn't want to try to find roles where he's searching for an Oscar. He'd rather be Nick Fury, or I'm trying to think what the other role he dropped was, but he name dropped, but it was another one of his roles. I think he's hoping for a sequel or a return on.
Mace Windu.
That was it. That was it.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Shit.
He's I would rather be playing Mace Windu or Nick Fury instead.
So he just likes being the whole action star kind of I mean, he's a nerd, so
yeah. I mean, he's a huge nerd.
That dude will take the paycheck. He'll laugh his way to the bank.
Yeah, I mean, he's in the new animated film that'll probably be out by the time this podcast gets released. But it's Paws of Fury, I think it is, and he's playing a cat.
Oh, okay.
And it's his line is, "What the mother, father, Santa Claus is going on here?" And of course, it's They want to say motherfucker, but it's a children's movie, so.
Oh, they can't do that in a children's movie?
No, they only get the one F-bomb in a PG-13 movie, but this is, I'm pretty sure, either rated G or rated PG. Probably PG, but.
Yeah, usually PG.
That's as bad as I was sick of his monkey fighting snakes on this Monday to Friday
plane, yeah.
So good.
Well, speaking of terrible like for television dub overs, John McClane's Yippee Ki Motherfucker is Yippee Ki Mr. Falcon or something like that. It's it's amazing what network television like will dub over.
What is this, 4Kids?
Yeah, right. Gosh, that's a deep cut. We'll have to talk shit about 4Kids in detail at some point in the future. But yeah, so Samuel L. Jackson though, like he's also been, I think at this point, the longest recurring character in the MCU, at least time wise. I don't think appearance wise, but he's up there like in appearances too. Because he originally debuted an end credit scene in
Iron Man 1.
Iron Man 1, and he's still around, and we still have Secret Wars coming out, which hasn't even started. I think it has started filming, but it's like not even. I don't think it'll come out until like late next year.
That, and for the most part, he's been like the glue that like keeps all these series together.
Yeah,
for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, it was Clark Gregg first. Who played Phil Coulson, and Coulson is a story I think we should talk about here, because Coulson's ties to Iron Man are probably the most significant. The two characters he has the most like meaningful interactions with are Iron Man and Thor. And when he's introduced in Iron Man, and this is something that they had to retcon in Captain Marvel. But the joke was strategic. He would never say S.H.I.E.L.D. He would spell it out: Strategic Homeland Intelligence, Enforcement Logistics Division. Like that, he would say it the whole time. Like he would spell it out. And of course, in Captain Marvel, they're just like, no, we're agents. Like Nick Fury's like, no, we're S.H.I.E.L.D. It's like, oh, okay. So Coulson was just a huge awkward nerd, like for 15 years.
Sounds about right.
Captain Marvel takes place, I think, like in the late 90s, and Iron Man 1 takes place in like 2008.
Was it? But what's the 90s?
Yeah, it
that's
was.
the 90s because Guardians of the Galaxy's in the 80s.
The
beginning.
The beginning parts in the mid 80s. Yeah. I mean, mixtapes were still a thing, so you knew it had to be the 80s or the 90s.
Yeah.
The reason why I remember so distinctly with Captain Marvel is because when she comes to Earth, she literally crashes through a blockbuster.
Oh,
which was like the most iconic like 90s thing you could do.
Yeah, because they don't exist.
Yeah. So so like for 10 years he's just this super awkward, like really good agent, don't get me wrong. But to kind of add to your point though, Fury definitely does become the glue, because as we all know, Coulson makes the ultimate sacrifice in the Avengers. And unfortunately gets stabbed through Loki while trying to protect Thor. And Coulson's death ends up being the catalyst that will unite the Avengers, and we'll talk more about that later. But Clark Gregg as Phil Coulson, I think, is one of the most, I don't want to say underrated because he's such a fan favorite, but he is a character that deserves to appear in every Marvel movie. Like, Clark Gregg the human being just seems super awesome. Like, from everything I've seen of him in interviews and the way like the cast talks about him and how he handles fan interactions.
Yeah, I haven't seen much, but he seems dope.
But in character, Coulson, in many ways, kind of was the audience stand-in. Kind of the way that like Watson is in Sherlock Holmes. Like, you are supposed to be seeing things from his eyes. He is a fan. He is involved in everything, and he was the character who appeared in like every movie. He appeared in, to link them all together. He was the original glue for Phase 1. And notwithstanding Sam Jackson, but like he was so popular that they even gave him his own spin-off show, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which lasted for 7 seasons. And fun fact about that is Sam Jackson actually appears as Nick Fury in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Oh, okay.
At the end of season 1. So Sam Jackson loves playing Nick Fury, which is really funny when you kind of hear that story. Have we I don't think we've talked about this before on the podcast, but
no.
Have we talked about how Sam Jackson basically got the role of Nick Fury?
I don't think so.
Well, first of all, it's because Sam Jackson is a badass motherfucker and he can get any role he wants.
What?
But aside from that, so Nick Fury, the original Nick Fury in the main 616 comic book universe, actually looks more like David Hasselhoff. He's a white dude with like the brown like poofy hair with the curl in the front, with a little like white patches on the side and an eye patch. And in fact, the resemblance was so accurate and uncanny that when Nick Fury's like appearances, they actually cast David Hasselhoff as Nick Fury. Fun fact. But then when Marvel, as most comics run into this issue, there's so much history and so much to like go through that it can be daunting for new readers to join in. So at the turn of the century, Marvel introduced the Ultimate Universe, which ended up Miles Morales debuted there. And of course, that's where we got the Samuel L. Jackson look-alike Nick Fury. They made Nick Fury African American and bald with a goatee and his eye patch. And the comic book writers and artists actually used Samuel L. Jackson's likeness without his permission. So, but Sam, as we've established, Sam Jackson, huge nerd, basically said, "Hey, that's cool. Just cast me as Nick Fury when in live action stuff."
And listen, I'm just saying, I won't sue you. Just
I do believe they did have to pay him in order to use his likeness. Like they negotiated something with him because Sam Jackson. If there's two things you need to know about Sam Jackson, he is a huge nerd, and he gets his money. Fun fact about Sam Jackson: he negotiates like every contract time to play golf, and like every contract because he can. So little fun fact about Sam Jackson. But so that's kind of how this all went together. Was that the comic book writers and artists were such big fans of his that they literally based Ultimate Nick Fury off of him, and here we are all this time later where he makes his debut and in Iron Man, and as Shoshima said, kind of ends up becoming the glue that really holds the whole team together. And yeah, I mean that's kind of history. We see where it went. Sam Jackson makes a shit ton of money every time he appears because he's Sam Jackson and because the MCU's been so successful. So what can you say? But Coulson's Clark Gregg, though, in many ways is kind of the heart of the early films. And he became such a popular fan favorite that he became a character kind of like DC's Harley Quinn, who debuted in one medium and then was brought into the mainstream comic universe because of how popular they were. Coulson, who I believe his nickname is Cheese in the comics. Philip Cheese Coulson. That's his nickname. He actually was introduced in the comics where they also brought a black Nick Fury Jr., into the mainstream MCU. So, kind of a little fun story there. But Phil Coulson, I actually believe they just had Phil Coulson, the character, play a villain for like the first time in his in his comic book. He was just a villain because there was a story where I think it was Secret Empire, I think is what it was called, but basically it was through Cosmic Cube shenanigans. Captain America has always been a Hydra sleeper agent. And right. And so Coulson, being a Captain America fanboy, is the one to figure out that Captain America is a traitor. Deadpool is working for Captain America, like has been deputized and is basically being a tool used by the Hydra. Captain America assassinates Coulson and kills him. And I guess, comic book shenanigans happen. Coulson gets resurrected, kind of like he does in the TV show, which is kind of funny. And he's so pissed off that, he was betrayed by Deadpool, who was his friend, and by Captain America, who is his idol. He turns to villainy. And I don't think that lasted very long, but it was an interesting experiment for sure to make Coulson the villain.
Yeah, trying to think of Coulson as the bad guy just does not sound right.
It doesn't, but I mean, when he's hell-bent on revenge, it at least is plausible.
No, I get you. I'm just saying, just trying to think about Coulson being a dick.
Yeah, so they actually...
I just remember knowing nothing about anything in the Marvel universe except that one little tidbit, and when it came out, people were pissed.
Oh yeah, with the Hydra Captain America.
Yeah, like it was so prolific that it became a meme for a while.
It did. It did. And so
Between that and the movies, the Hail Hydra was a meme.
yeah, Hail Hydra was also a
Yeah.
huge meme.
Mhm.
But no, the thing with the Secret Empire storyline was the authors wrote themselves into a corner,
Mhm.
and they basically tried to tell everybody, like, in order to sell issues, we're not going to end this with Cosmic Cube shenanigans. Guess how they
Yeah.
ended it.
I'm gonna guess Cosmic Cube Shenanigans. For
Ding, 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 ding,
$1,000.
ding! We have a winner!
Yes!
Yeah. So, and of course, it involved like a living embodiment of a cosmic cube, and
So extra Cosmic Cube shenanigans.
yeah. So, like, okay. So, as an MCU fan, when I hear people talk about like how convoluted the MCU plots are, which to an extent they are, like by movie going standards, as a comic book fan, I'm like, dude, you ain't seen. Like no,
takes a big drag of a cigarette. You haven't seen shit.
yeah. There's not even a single MCU plot, like even Endgame, because Endgame was the biggest like comic book plot, right, with time travel and alternate
Yeah.
timelines and all this. And I'm like, that doesn't even breach, I would say, the top 50 in convoluted comic book storylines.
Oh, no arguments here.
Yeah. I mean, this is the same company, by the way, that like literally can't help but keep giving Peter Parker clones in every universe.
I'm not gonna lie, one of those clones is one of my favorite Spider-Man.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing. Ben Reilly is pretty sweet, but yeah, there's a lot of clones. There's a lot of clones, and then there's a lot.
No Jutsu.
And there's a lot of time travel. I mean, anything involving like Kang the Conqueror, like that in itself is pretty crazy. The TVA, which was introduced in Loki, like yeah, that's where you start getting into some crazy stuff. But that's a whole other story. But
Yeah, which is why I'm kind of interested in how everything goes. I can now actually watch Doctor Strange. I heard that was on streaming services.
yeah, it went on streaming services. It actually debuted a week ago, so all of you guys know.
Yeah.
All the listeners know when we're recording this. We're at the end of June right now. But yeah, I highly recommend checking it out. The new Doctor Strange film. I think we've talked about this before. Are you a fan of like Evil Dead?
You know, I've seen a little bit of it. Its campiness. I did hear about that
Hey,
though.
Samurai, you're again all over the place as far as like sound.
Oh my god, I don't know what's going on then.
Yeah.
I'm consistently at my mic right now.
Yeah, I don't know. But so for those that missed it or maybe couldn't catch it, he said that he's not like a huge fan of those. He's seen a couple of them, but
and you've seen the campiness.
Yeah, the campiness. So there's a lot of that in Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange is a Sam Raimi film through and through.
You know what? I can't wait to actually watch that then.
I think you're going to enjoy it. I really do. I have some stuff, but we'll talk about that when we get there, which will be several episodes from now, obviously. But yeah, so again, it's like with Coulson, he kind of serves as the glue, and he again, he doesn't play like as big of a role in Iron Man 2 compared to Iron Man 1, or even Thor, but he's there, and more of the spotlight's on Fury and Natasha, of course, at this point. And it's just interesting to me because, like, watching it back, you're seeing the foundation of the MCU literally being built from the ground up, and you see kind of where everything started. And they give Natasha like one of the best fight scenes in, I think, the entire MCU, in my opinion, in this movie, where Happy is fighting one guard in Hammer, and at the same time, Natasha goes through like
the whole
hallway, like the entire Hammer security force, and I'll just never forget. Happy like finally knocks the dude out and is like, "Don't worry, I got him." And then he just like looks up and there's like a dude like dangling from the ceiling, and like people are just broken bodies everywhere, and he's just kind of like,
well, shit.
Yeah, just staring blankly, like mouth open. Like he sells it perfectly. It's like one of the best, like, and funniest moments to me is Happy.
Right.
Like he just, I don't know. It's just like, yeah, like Natasha Romanoff just comes in and wipes the floor with everybody, and Happy, like, wins his fight, which is awesome, but it takes him that whole time to beat one guy that just for Natasha to go through the entire security force.
Just everybody.
Yeah.
Now, I have a question, and this one's kind of going on to the business side of things. Was this one Disney influenced, or when did that start?
So Disney, I think, bought out Marvel around this time. I don't remember exactly when the buyout was, but their influence didn't start to take effect until Phase 2.
Yeah, I remember it was after Avengers, their influence.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly. I don't have my exact date, but yes, your timeline is accurate. This is right around the time of the Disney Marvel purchase.
Okay.
I want to say I think that it was announced. I think around this time, and I think it finalized. I want to say in 2011, but again, I don't have that off the top of my head. But yeah, you're correct in this is the timeline that's going on in the business side. And
I just remember high school. Oh, jeez. Wow, that was forever ago. I remember high school talking to someone about how they're going to mess it up in the hallway, and obviously that was a lie.
Yeah, they clearly didn't. Disney knew what they were doing, and they basically let. In fact, I would actually argue they made improvements.
Yeah.
Because for those that don't know, at this time, Marvel Television and the Marvel films were separate, and there was like this creative council, and the creative council was basically Kevin Feige's like worst nightmare. They vetoed a lot of stuff, a lot of ideas. It was really difficult, and a lot of people complained about like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. being affected by the movies, but never being acknowledged on television. And the answer is because Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was being written by a different team than the creative minds behind the MCU. So while they were technically quote unquote part of it, it's kind of like the Netflix stuff. Same deal. Marvel Television was a separate entity from the film division, and
yeah. So I was gonna mention as far as just fight scenes.
Yeah,
I have to say that Daredevil hallway fight scene was pretty dope.
I think Daredevil has the greatest fight scene in the entire MCU.
Yeah, we're considering that it's still the MCU.
And that was also done in one shot, which makes it even more impressive. But yeah, it's if you want to see like some really good cinematography, Samurai, check out. I think it's like Daredevil, like season 1, episode 2, or episode 3.
Yeah, I don't know the episode. I know it's season 1.
It's very early in it, and there's like this hallway scene, and it's a fight scene with Daredevil and like a bunch of goons, and it's literally done in one shot, and it's incredible.
It's dope.
Yeah, and yeah, the MCU television, like the Netflix shows, had some really good fight scenes and some really good stuff. Like a lot of people argue that Kilgrave from Jessica Jones is one of the most terrifying villains in all of the MCU.
Yeah, and then you get to Iron Fist, and the fight scenes suck.
Yeah, so Iron Fist, we'll talk about the Netflix shows. We'll probably do a separate episode on all the Netflix shows. But
crap.
Iron Fist had a lot of stuff go wrong.
Yeah.
They also hired, I believe it was the same director who did Inhumans. And Inhumans, if most people don't remember, is considered to be the first and really only flop that Marvel has put out. It was a disaster. It was terrible. And we'll talk about it later. We'll talk about Inhumans too. I will probably dedicate like a good 15-minute segment to just absolutely shitting on Inhumans and everything to do with it.
Seems legit.
But yeah, we'll talk about that at another time. But yeah, so that's a big issue too, is that going on behind the scenes at this time was obviously there was a tug of war. There were still rights issues. Spider-Man, for example, wasn't. Sony was still trying to work on their Spider-Man films. They were about to reboot it with The Amazing Spider-Man, with Andrew Garfield, and
which I didn't hate, by the way.
No. Like I think most people agree that like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man was better than Tobey Maguire's.
Yeah.
And Tobey Maguire, I think, played a better Peter Parker than Andrew Garfield did.
That's usually the general consensus.
But the Amazing Spider-Man films, like, and we'll probably talk about those a little bit when we talk about Spider-Man more, and we bring in, when we hit Captain America: Civil War. But the biggest thing was Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, didn't wisecrack, which is like a core part of his character.
He did a little bit, but it's not the same.
No, it wasn't anywhere close. That was what was missing.
Mhm.
Like, in an otherwise amazing, like, because don't get me wrong, like, I love Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and I love the Sam Raimi films, but that was what was missing. Was he was not witty enough and cracking jokes. It was almost too serious, which is kind of funny thinking about it. Whereas in Andrew Garfield's, they really brought back his quips, like, "Oh no, you found my weakness!
A small knife,
Tiny knives!" And he just, webs the dude like, "What are you doing?" But
I had to watch that before we went into the last Spider-Man movie.
oh yeah, No Way Home.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I'd never seen them.
Yeah, so we won't dive too deep into No Way Home spoilers, even though it's literally been out at this point at the time of this recording for like 7 months.
Yeah.
But for those that don't know, it's good. Watch it, and we will absolutely come back to it again. Probably when we talk Spider-Man. When we get to Captain America: Civil War, we might have to do a whole podcast just on Spider-Man and the saga of like getting him and Tom Holland into the MCU, and of course where it left off. But we may have to do a whole thing just on Spider-Man, because Spider-Man is just...
Oh no, what will I do?
Yeah, I know. I'm looking at Shoshima, for those that don't have video. I'm looking at him because he's a huge Spider-Man fan. He even had Spider-Man in his wedding.
Maybe.
He was hiding under the cake.
Mm-hmm.
This is a true story. I'm not making this up. But yeah, so we'll talk Spider-Man for sure. We will probably have to do, because I think Spider-Man's important enough to comic books and the MCU in general that we will have to have a whole discussion on Spider-Man when we reach Civil War. But yeah, so at the time, this is Marvel basically doing what they can with a limited roster, limited licensing available. They don't have X-Men, they don't have Spider-Man.
No, and so far their roster's been Iron Man
and Hulk. Yeah, that's it.
And now Iron Man again.
Yeah.
I mean...
And again, as we talked about during the first Iron Man podcast, Iron Man was a B+, was a B-rated, B-tiered comic book character at the time. And now, thanks to Robert Downey Jr. and Marvel, he's an S-tier character again. And it's pretty crazy. Like, he's now a top seller again, which is nuts. But that's the power of good media. So we've been going here. It looks like we're at about the 45-minute mark, give or take a couple minutes. So let's kind of do some final thoughts on Iron Man, and we'll wrap up. So Iron Man 2, I think all of us are kind of in consensus that it's probably at middle tier at best. Largely forgettable movie. Great cast, maybe not the greatest execution. Kind of suffering a little bit from sequelitis.
Yeah, I'd still say better than Iron Man 3.
Yeah, there's no question in my mind. Iron Man 3, This might be a hot take for some. Iron Man 3 is a bottom tier MCU movie for me.
I don't think that's a hot take. I think that's a pretty safe bet.
Yeah, so, that's a cold take.
Generally, what I've heard is that the order is that most people like it is Iron Man 1 is the best, Iron Man 3, then Iron Man 2. Most people consider Iron Man 2 the worst film.
Iron Man 3 was just way too much.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I'll do a deep dive onto why I think Iron Man 3 is bottom tier film. And spoiler, it doesn't have to do with Robert Downey Jr. Just want to throw that out there. But we'll talk about that when we get there. But Iron Man 2, I think, is, I would say, probably it's okay. It's not bad, but it's not good. It's not great either.
It's a fun movie.
Yeah, it's fun, and I think the highlight for me personally, Justin Hammer was a huge highlight of this movie. Don Cheadle, introducing Scarlett Johansson as Natasha Romanoff, and of course getting to see Rhodey in War Machine outfit.
Pretty dope.
The final fight is a lot of fun. I really enjoy the final fight of Iron Man 2.
Yeah, no, the final fight is pretty dope.
So, Samurai, how about you? I know you don't really remember a whole lot about the film, but from what you do remember,
and that's the thing, because to be perfectly honest, like, my memory serves me best like Thor and Up.
Yeah.
So with this one, it was more of this was one of those ones that I just kind of saw accidentally. Like, I was working somewhere and it was on. And
Got it.
Sure, okay, passing time. So, I mean, it was a forgettable movie watched at a very inconsistent time of Marvel for me.
Yeah, and that's fair because, like we've talked about, you weren't like a huge Marvel fanatic when we started.
I just like the
No.
idea, like, oh dang, I accidentally watched Iron Man.
Yeah,
It was, like, I worked at
and Samurai, your audio quality is again all over the place.
fucking dipping. Okay. No, I worked at the CRC.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And one of the kids would put it on, and it's kind of like I'm, watching over them while watching over the building, and also have that on in the background. So yes, it was. I accidentally watched this.
I know. I'm not. I'm just saying. I just like the concept of like, oh dang, I happened to watch Iron Man.
Yeah, and everyone, real quick, I do apologize, Samurai. We've been having some audio issues for a while. We fixed one, and we thought we had it. We did a whole bunch of testing before we went live, and obviously, we think it could be his internet connection. That's the thing. Just with the way it's dipping, it's probably
Normally.
Yeah, that's probably what it is because like he's coming in really hot sometimes, and then
Not so much.
not so
Yeah.
much.
I mean, once I move into a different studio, it's gonna be better. I hope. I
Yeah.
mean, 500 down and like 500 up.
Yeah,
Holy
that should make a
crap.
pretty significant difference. So
Yeah.
again, we do apologize. That's why Samurai missed 2 weeks ago. Last week he had personal stuff, so that's why he wasn't here. We're trying to
Yeah.
keep him involved, but obviously, as you can tell, we're having some technical problems. So don't be upset with him. But
It's getting
Yeah.
tough.
It's all Shenzo's fault, not Samurai's.
yeah, I mean, you know what? I'll accept it. It's all my fault.
But yeah.
I should be paying Samurai the gas to drive down here
Oh.
and record in person.
All your complaints can go to Haseo13 at some sort of email.com.
Dude, so we close. Samurai, you missed this last week, but we close everything, with giving out our socials. And I literally had to go, Haseo, you don't have any socials, do you? And he's like, no, I don't. I'm not. I'm like, okay, so we're just going to skip him. And, but,
I liked my fake email for Haseo, though.
yeah, no, that was pretty good. I appreciate it. But yeah, so and then Shoshima, what about you? Like, I know you said kind of it's more middle, but like, what are your kind of final thoughts on Iron Man 2?
It's not in trash tier,
Yeah.
if we were doing a tier list, but I do think there's some awesome scenes. Again, the trailers you can cut from it. There's some really good fight scenes.
Great soundtrack.
Soundtrack was good. I don't know why, but the stupid Iron Man lasers from his fist and he like reloads the magazines or whatever, or they like fire out, just like still is in my head.
Yeah. The NASCAR scene is pretty cool.
Oh, well, no, NASCAR or Formula One?
Well, it's Formula One, but like it's NASCAR.
It's European NASCAR.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
European
right?
NASCAR. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I do remember that with the briefcase.
Yeah, and the briefcase suit up is one of the most iconic in my opinion. There's lots of like iconic stuff, but like
Yeah, but it's just they do try to do a lot. Like the character is almost confusing since they're fusing the two. Like me as a casual viewer,
and they also didn't really give Mickey Rourke a lot of room. Like,
oh yeah,
out of the two villains, I think Justin Hammer is the one most people remember for his performance.
Honestly, I don't even remember who Justin Hammer is right now.
Yeah, well, he was the dude who appeared. He had the glasses and the suit. I can't remember the actor who played him, but he was basically like, "Hey, we're buddies, right?" Like,
yeah, I vaguely remember, but I feel like because Mickey Rourke was just shoved down our throats in the trailers and stuff.
Yeah, well, he was the
That's
main villain.
Yeah,
but like again, it's for me like out of the two villains, the one I remember more about is Justin Hammer. Justin Hammer has way more like iconic moments where he's like. Literally, Mickey Rourke's character is, like we said, it's a fusion of two Iron Man villains. And his motivation is, he hates, like, the Stark family because apparently, like, Howard fired his dad and caused him to go into ruin or something like that.
Yeah.
And,
Hold on.
yeah. And it's like, but it's like, he barely speaks, and he spends most of his time on screen with the bird.
Mm-hmm.
So, Yeah, I don't know. Just for me, like Mickey Rourke, I think was the first of I think what would be a warning sign with the Marvel villain problem.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, just Iron Man 2, it was like, oh, okay, like, yeah, this isn't gonna be some huge, grandiose thing.
Yeah.
Which now we know stupid it was. But,
Yeah.
it did kind of have some, like, red flags.
Yeah, for sure.
Day.
And I think Iron Man 2 is where it's really apparent that the villain problem, like, in Marvel, which is an ongoing problem in the MCU, even to this day, unfortunately, has been a it's just been something that we see it with kind of Mickey Rourke. It's just kind of a bland villain who just hates Stark, and he doesn't really get a lot of character development or explanations. It's kind of like a very beginning opening scene where like his father's like on his deathbed cursing like Howard Stark's name, and he decides to take it up with Tony. Okay.
Wait, this isn't like the Mandarin guy, right?
No, so the Ten Rings organization I think is alluded to, but it's not featured, and the Mandarin will appear in Iron Man 3, and we'll talk about that.
Will appear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll talk about that because at the time it was a super controversial decision, and we'll talk a lot about Ben Kingsley who played Trevor Slattery. And how amazing he was in the role, but the anger and the whitewashing of that role. And of course, we'll go into the history of the Mandarin in general and how problematic it is. So, we will explain kind of why Marvel decided to go that route, but we'll talk about that in Iron Man 3 because that's where it comes in. But
okay.
The Ten Rings are, I believe, like hinted at in this movie. Like I think you can see their symbol like in a background or like one of their businessmen when they're trying to like buy tech. But they are not currently, they are not even the focus here in Iron Man 2.
Okay, so that's number 3. All right.
Yeah. So, and again, so with that being said, thank you guys very much again, as always, for being here. Again, I want to apologize for the audio issues. Samurai does not have the most reliable internet connection, unfortunately, but as we mentioned, he is working on a new studio where he'll be recording from. At some point in the future, I don't want to put like an ETA because I don't want to put any pressure on him. But
I don't even have an ETA with everything going the way that it is.
Yeah. So, but with that being said, like we are going to continue to try to have him on to the best of our ability. So again, I do apologize, but we will continue to try and do our best with it. With that being said, though, Samurai, assuming your internet connection holds up, where can they find you?
You can find me at SamuraiNoodlez. That's noodles with a Z, all one word, on Twitter.
And how about you, Shoshima?
They can find me at Zachary1016, Zackery 1016 on Twitter. And any complaints about the podcast, Haseo13 at somesortofemail.com.
There you go. And of course, you can find me at Shins of the Lost on Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, wherever social media is, except Facebook. Don't try to find me on Facebook. Instagram, though, I am on Instagram, which is technically under Meta, I think is now it's called. God, what a stupid concept. We'll have to talk about that at some point.
That's a whole other podcast.
But with that being said, again, thank you guys very much. Thanks for bearing with us on these technical issues. I promise we will try to get better. And with that, we will sign off. And we will see you next week for another episode of the Lost One Podcast. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.